Hello and welcome to The Agenda on Politics Social. I'm joined, as always, on the show by Phil Moorhouse. How you doing, Phil? You all right, mate?
Afternoon. I'm actually in pain. I'm in incredible pain, but never mind. I have, the doctor thinks sciatica, so later on I'm going to be off my tits.
Oh, no, get some pie inside you. It's pie day today, apparently.
It's pie day.
If you're a
Yes.
Yank.
Well, unfortunately, there is no 14th of March, so we have to defer to the Americans on this one. There could be no other pie day.
There is a 14th of March. It's today.
No, it's today. There isn't a 14th month. So in the British thing, Pi Day would be the 3rd of the 14th month, but there isn't one, so we have to defer to America.
There should be 13 months or 28 days, and we get an extra day for a big party at the end of the year. That's the extra day. That's the year day. And then when it's a leap year, we get 2 days off for an even bigger party.
We used to have 10 months, so maybe we'll get inflation at some point and get the 13th month. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Big shout out to Billy in the chat. Also, we've got Duke there. We've got Dave. We've got Paul. We've got Saz. We've got Lucas. We've got It's Neutrals. We've got Anne. We've got Colin Baker. We've got Russell Cannon. We've got everyone in the chat. This is really great. If you'd like to join our friends in the chat, all you need to slam that subscribe key. Just give it a good tickle and wait for a minute and you'll be able to join them in the chat. But don't be rude or we will mute you and boot you. So, Phil, we're going to be talking about the NHS today, mostly. Or NHS England. They're going to abolish the NHS, Phil. I told you Labour are going to do this. I told you Labour were going to abolish the NHS. And now they're literally going to abolish the NHS. Have you got anything to say about it?
Yeah. So what's happening? I've had a few comments. It's absolutely hilarious. So what's happening is they're taking this quasi-autonomous department that was created by the Tories specifically to make the NHS inefficient, and they're bringing all of its functions within the control of the state. And some people who think they're a socialist are against this because they think it's privatisation. When it's literally bringing something that was separate from state control into state control.
Yes. And
it was created, NHS England was specifically created to make the NHS less efficient so that the Tories could claim they're putting all this money in and outcomes like, oh, it's all rubbish. And that way claim that obviously the publicly funded model has failed, we should privatise it instead.
That's the noise I make whenever I'm confronted with NHS shitness. I just go, oh, it's rubbish. But yeah, the NHS has been wound down and made a bit shit, the enshittification, by the Tories on purpose, using the same model that they used for British Rail. They did exactly the same thing in the 80s under Thatcher. They made British Rail shitter and shitter and shitter, and so people didn't complain when it got privatised, and they did it on purpose.
Yeah.
So what's happening? The Labour is scrapping NHS England and merging it into the Department of Health and Social Care.
So, I mean, this is just actually shows you, obviously, I mean, we're talking about the job losses, and I've seen all sorts of weird and wonderful numbers being bandied about. I don't know how much it'll actually be. It'll be a lot. And it's never nice because you're talking about people losing their jobs, and many of those people, if not most of them, will have been doing a perfectly good job. It's not their fault. But just to highlight the scale of how bad NHS England is, all of the things that NHS England does are still going to be done. They're just going to be done by the Department for Health and Social Care now. So everyone who was doing that job will just move to the Department for Health and Social Care. They won't be losing their job. So everyone who is losing their job is someone for whom there's already someone in the Department of Health and Social Care doing that job. So every single person losing that job was not actually really doing a job. It was like you're sort of digging a hole in the communist state scenario.
For someone
Except it's like, now you may not have experience of this. I certainly don't have experience of this. You don't actually get this in teaching, or not in my experience. But I've known lots of people who've worked for big companies. And one thing that keeps coming up is how often they come across someone who's usually quite senior and does nothing of value to the company. But what they do is create extra unnecessary work for everyone else.
Yes.
So it's almost like these big companies, it's like they accidentally employ people who do nothing, but they make other people less efficient.
Yes.
Well, that was the
CIA.
NHS
They're
England.
part of the CIA, Phil. They're infiltrating all the anti-Brexit groups, mate. There was someone from the CIA in all of those groups.
Yeah. But that's what NHS England was. It was designed to be an entire organisation who would do that to the whole NHS.
Yeah, yeah. SG in the chat. Thank you very much for the first super chat of the show, SG. Very generous of you. What does it politicise the NHS?
Well, every government department's political. In fact, every public service is political, whether it's privatised or not.
You could argue that people who say that we should privatise the railways are saying, "Oh, so you want to politicise them, then? Eh? Is that what you want?"
Yeah. Everything's political. If the government have any control over it, it's political. If they decide to regulate an industry, all of a sudden that industry is political. I mean, politics is managing a society. That's basically what it is. Yeah. So everything is political.
But this is huge. I mean, the government are saying it's going to cut bureaucracy. It's going to save £500 million for the NHS.
It'll save several billion. I don't know where the other. It'll save several billion. I don't know where the rest of the money's going then. Maybe Wish Street is going to take it. I don't think he is, but
no,
it'll save more than £500 million.
Well, yeah. Well, at least. Let's say at least.
Because you think about the way it's not just that there's people doing jobs that they talked about the duplication, but it's not just duplication. It was actually slowing down things in the NHS. So the cost savings will be more than just the salaries saved.
Yeah. But there was something really disturbing today because 10,000 job cuts.
I suspect it won't be that much, but if it is, that just shows you, because none of the jobs that NHS England did are not going to be done. They're still going to be done.
Yeah,
they're just going to be done inside the Department for Health and Social Care.
A layer of bureaucracy.
So if it is 10,000, and I find that really difficult to believe, but if it is 10,000. That's 10,000 people who weren't doing anything useful for the NHS.
And costing the NHS money. Well, costing the British taxpayer.
Not just in salaries, also in accommodation. They needed officers and computers and things like that, and travel to go to silly meetings. And as well as the fact that because it was literally their job to make NHS staff less efficient, it was also reducing productivity in the NHS.
Yeah. Well, it's going to end the duplication of work between NHS England and the DHSC. Ministers will have direct control of decisions instead of it being made by this arm's length body. And the money saved, as you said, from the redundancies, the admin costs, the computers, the admin costs,
expensive accommodation.
Yeah, could be redirected to frontline care. And this comes out of Wes Streeting. I'm a big fan of Wes Streeting on this channel, but this comes out of his, frustration with the NHS's slow progress on waiting times, hospital efficiency.
Oh yeah,
spending,
they weren't planning on this. This was not in their original plans. They've obviously come in thinking they could reform it, and I don't. Obviously, I'm not invited to their meeting, so I don't know what the actual process was. But I can imagine they just looked at it and went, why aren't we just bringing it in-house?
Yeah. But the remarkable thing, and first of all, I'll just say a big thank you to Tim Ballon for the £5 super chat. Thank you very much, Tim. Tim's always very kind on this channel. 10,000 more nurses at zero cost, asks Tim.
I'm not sure what the average salary of the administrators who will be losing their job is. It'd be difficult for me to believe it's more than a nurse, but nonetheless, you could literally just transfer those savings into paying for more nurses.
But what's really disturbing?
Or more training places, training places to train more nurses and doctors, so we actually have them to hire in the first place.
What's really disturbing me is the consensus of agreement here. Like the Mail was like, yeah, great. The Guardian was like, yeah, great. They had people calling in James O'Brien's radio show this morning for an hour. They spoke to doctors, nurses, healthcare administrators, and all of them went, yeah. That's
because
terrifying almost.
Honestly,
I'm not used to this. I'm not used to all this agreement, Phil. What's going on?
It's quite personal for me because I still blame Cameron's, monkeying about with the NHS for the death of a close friend of mine. But nonetheless, even when I'm sort of looking more impassionately, it was created to make the NHS less efficient. Wow. I can't,
that's some Machiavellian evil right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
By people who can afford private healthcare.
There was some people talking, genuinely, they weren't trolling or anything, and they were trying to say things like, but isn't its job like long-term planning? Wasn't it good to have this thing outside that goes long-term planning? That long-term planning, right? A couple of years ago, MPs, Labour MPs mostly, but Lib Dems as well, were hammering on Steve Barclay saying, where's this long-term staffing plan? Where's it gone? I mean, if you're going to do any long-term planning, staffing plans have to be front and centre. You need to know how much staff you expect to need in the next generation and how you're going to get them. And eventually, NHS England did indeed bring out a report. It was 2023. So they'd been in operation for over 10 years before they actually could wheedle something out. And it basically said, I've got it up here, it's quite remarkable. Apart from the fact it goes through showing how few nurses and doctors per capita we have than other countries, right? And then it said, in the first overview, first line of it says, our assessment is, compared to 2022, which will have been the last full set of data, domestic education and training will need to increase between 50 and 65% by 2030. Yeah. So straight away, after 11 years of being in existence, they've created a situation where the only way we can meet our workforce needs is we literally need to double the number of training places by over 50%. Yeah. And of course, then the government, who thought that NHS England were a terribly good idea, have they done that? No, they have not.
Of course not. Just to stop you there, because we have got a big super chat that's just come in, €20. Thank you so much to Just Me in Videos. The world keeps getting weirder. Stay safe and make the most of it. Those of us who have no influence just have to stand by and support those who can exert some influence for the better. So thanks for that, Just Me in Vids. But honestly, we all have influence. We all have a group of people that we know, or friends, family, or someone out there that we can, if we share these videos, Phil's videos, my videos, Santi's videos, whoever, who are making these points, share them, and it doesn't cost anything except your time, possibly your reputation if it's a shit video. But yeah, I think that is something that everyone can do to amplify what people who you agree with are saying, because at the moment it's just the tabloids who are taking over. But Phil, I did want to push back on one thing, because I was going to go on about how everyone's sort of on the same page, except unions. There's some unions who have slammed the shambolic handling of 10,000 jobs.
Because they've got to stand up for their members.
Yeah.
That's their job. It's their job to stand up for their members. And it's not pleasant that some people will lose their jobs. It's like, ideally what you'd have is go, okay, well, we need more administrators in these areas, so we'll try. But that's not going to happen. So obviously unions are going to have to stand up for their members. That is what they do.
So we've got, the risks in the future giving all this power back to the Tories if they ever get back into power.
Well, it's not. No, it's the power that they can have anyway.
Yeah, they used to have it anyway.
And it's utterly insane. Like, the thing is, I mean, this is my point. If you can't get an appointment with the doctor, or your treatment's taking too long or something like that, no one thinks, oh, NHS England are rubbish. No, they blame the government. If think about the privatised public services. If the trains don't run on time, who are the people going to blame? They're going to blame the government. Whatever it is, whatever public service there is. And I don't understand why Conservatives want to privatise it all, because they're going to get the blame for it, and yet they're giving the responsibility to people who won't get the blame. How does that work? If I was going to be held responsible for something, I would want to make sure I'm making the decisions on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. But their mates are making money, Phil, so they need their mates to make money, and then they're a minister for a few years, and then they leave, and they get a position on the board of directors on one of the companies that they themselves privatise. That's nice, isn't it? Well,
that's it. I mean, it's just personal greed. It's not really. It's not really
2 hours
political,
a year,
it's just personal.
For £2 million, it's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, when the Tories get back in, if the Tories get back into government, it is a worry that what they'll do with this power. But as we said, like, this thing was only created in 2012 just to create more bureaucracy, which is so funny. Like the Tories go on and on about fucking red tape, don't they? That's one of their favourite things, along with hating foreigners. They go on about it like, oh, we're going to cut red tape, we're going to have efficiencies. And they are literally the most inefficient bunch of dickheads ever. They've made trading around the EU way more difficult than it used to be. Way, way more difficult. And we're feeling the pinch of that. We're feeling the prices.
Yeah.
The price of a pint of beer has doubled in the last 10 years. Since the fucking referendum, the price of a pint of beer has doubled. I don't think it's ever done that before in history.
A load of Weatherspoons closed down there, so there's that. Yin and yang.
Never spoons. Isn't there a pub called the European that's like
Yeah, that took over an old
They took
Weatherspoons
over
that
an old
closed down,
Weatherspoons.
yeah.
And it's called the European. Sounds great to me. Tim Ballum, thank you very much for the £5 super shot. Lowest wage is 20k to 24k, and the manager's on about 42 to 57k.
Yeah, I think that was in reference to how many nurses can you buy for an administrator. So I would think the administrators are probably on average less than a nurse. So I don't think so. But you can get more nurses, is the point.
Yeah. Well, look, I always think of an analogy that a friend of mine who served with the forces always used to talk about, because he was in Iraq, he was in Afghanistan during the time that things were changing with smartphones and being able to have more communication than ever before. And he just thought it was a bad thing because in the past, in his first couple of tours, the people down on the ground, the commander down on the ground would actually make a decision there and then, right? And it would be, lightning fast. We need to do this now, right? But once you add in more layers of bureaucracy, if you like, or fact checking, I guess, can we go and do this? That absolves the person from having to make that decision. They've got a mobile phone now. They can send a text or something saying, can we go ahead with doing this thing?
Yeah.
And it just gums up the works along the way. And I see the same thing with the NHS. I would like to see hospitals making more decisions without having to defer to what NHS England has to say to them. So it does very much depend on how the government play this. But if it goes hand in hand with the ideas about devolution and giving individual areas more say over their education, hopefully over their health, over their infrastructure and things like that, this could really, really be a big game changer. I mean, it's a bold policy. It's the first bold policy that Labour have really had since they got into power. That's made everyone go, what?
Well, I would agree that not enough people are sitting up and taking notice from other things they've done, but that's because they haven't been really communicating them. But as you say, this has across the board appeal. To the left, this is having more. This is state control of the NHS again, and to the right, it's actually cutting bureaucracy. So both sides like it. Apart from the ones who seem to think it's privatisation when you bring a public services under state control.
Well, indeed.
But I'm not really sure what you can do about those people.
Not much. Well, there's people who think this is privatisation by stealth. And I'm like, well, isn't it the opposite of privatisation?
Yes.
Because surely the next step for the
nationalisation
Tories was to privatise.
Control.
Yeah, privatise NHS England. That was probably the next step along the way. So we had to ask some money person if their shareholders would approve this operation or not.
This is exactly what it was, and that's what I said. It's always about a plan of privatising the NHS. NHS England was what would happen if you actually privatised it. If you suddenly said, right, there's no more public money, charge people for medical treatment. That's what NHS England would be, the privatised NHS. That's what they were doing. They were separating it off from the state. Yeah. This reverses it.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's hopefully, local NHS leaders would be given more autonomy. Care can improve. Like we're talking about employing more nurses with the wages that we were spending on admin. But there are possible risks to patient services during this transition. It's the biggest employer in the world, isn't it? The NHS.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Maybe. I'm pretty sure it is in Europe at any rate.
Right.
It might well be.
Do you think that this is, in some respects, it is a high-risk gamble. Do you think we're going to see the results of this before the next general election?
Well, what I would say is we're already seeing NHS waiting lists come down, which is a big thing for people.
Yeah.
I rang up. So I rang up for a doctor's appointment this morning and I got one quite quickly. That didn't happen even a year ago. So even though you can see in the papers, we're freeing up more appointments, getting more appointments. Well, I've just seen it today.
Yeah.
So maybe people are seeing that as well. Maybe that's not just my experience. Maybe other people are experiencing the same thing. Ringing up the doctor in the morning, getting an appointment that same morning.
Yes.
Which is what I did today.
Yeah.
which I've
Yeah.
not had in a long time.
Wow. Do you think it will help with the public perception then, just in general? You know, because this is Labour's big thing for fixing the NHS.
I don't think people really care as long as they see the results. So it's a case of whether they're going to see the results. The results of this, will that show for the next election? Who knows? But as long as the NHS keeps improving, then people will just say, whatever the government do, the general members of the public don't go, oh yeah, all this is improving, but we don't like that thing you're doing.
Yeah.
They don't care how you do it. That's the thing about, people don't really care about the mechanism once it's ongoing. They just care about the results. If they can see the results before they bother to think about the mechanism, then they'll just accept it as long as it's getting better.
Yeah, yeah. All right, do you want to move on? Talk about the
do.
PPE scandal, the COVID inquiry. We've had Michelle moaning.
Yeah, she has been moaning again. Yeah, she's issued a statement. It's fairly hilarious.
Tell us about the Streisand effect.
So, well, she keeps doing this. She did like a TV program at one point, didn't she? Yeah. She's under criminal investigation. I don't know whether she thinks that by trying to get public sympathy, she can get criminal investigators to back off. This does not occur. But she's not getting public sympathy because, first of all, she comes across as an entitled tosser along with her husband, Doug Barrowman. And secondly, people died waiting for PPE. Frontline healthcare and social care staff got long COVID because they didn't have PPE. There were 3 levels to this, and there should be more emphasis on the government over this, not just Michelle Mone. But first of all, in 2019, Boris Johnson was told, as a new prime minister, that stockpiles of PPE. We didn't know COVID was on the way at the time. Stockpiles of PPE, needed replenishing. This is because the last time NHS stockpiles were replenished was under Gordon Brown, like Labour government. The Tories, because they never spend anything on anything they don't have to, just went, oh, it's fine. And then it's like, no, it's not fine because it only lasts so long. It's only got a shelf life. So we had to replace them. No, we won't do that, he said. So then COVID hits. And then it's like, oh, we could really do with that PPE now. Do they gear into action and go, right, let's just get a load of PPE? No, they delay. We now know why they delayed, because they set up their VIP lane to give a load of contracts to people who had no experience of supplying PPE. And in order to let them do it, because they were obviously going to do it very inefficiently because they don't know what to do, they gave them shitloads of money under cover of it being an emergency, so that they could make huge profits. Michelle Mone, in her statement yesterday, was saying how it was a risk for them because they didn't get the money up front. They were risking tens of millions of pounds of capital. And it's like, so you're basically saying you had to spend tens of millions of pounds on this stuff that you then gave to the NHS, but your contracts were for over 200 million pounds. That's a lot of profit.
Yeah.
That is a lot. And that's how they did. That's what the VIP lane was. It was a reward for mates and donors.
Yeah. So corrupt to the core, and they took
it
money.
Cost lives.
It costs money, a lot of money, and it costs lives as well. Absolutely disgraceful. Just to go back onto the last topic for a moment, because we got a super chat from John C. Thank you very much, John. That's very kind of you. The Health and Care Act 2012 was opposed by the Royal College of Nurses, the RC Midwives, the Royal
College
C
of
of GPs, the Royal College of GPs, and the British Medical Association after they tried to work with the Tory government. It was supported by the CBI. Say no more. Fair enough. I can't argue with that. I just go back onto Michelle Mone, and Michael Gove was up in front of the getting questioned about giving one of his mates over £100 million contract, a mate who had no prior experience of importing PPE.
Well, at the moment, the government are trying to claw back billions. Because remember, if we talk about Michelle Mone, so PPE MedPro, the company that didn't exist before May 2020, suddenly sprang up like a lot of others. So they had 2 major contracts. Now, one of them was fulfilled. They handed over the stuff that was ordered. It was still at an eye-wateringly extortionate price. There's nothing that can be done about that. You can't obviously investigate. It's corruption, but it's not like illegal corruption. That's the government just being too generous. When you vote for a government, you vote for them to be able to, pretty much do what they want with the taxpayer money. So there's nothing to be done about that. But when Rachel Reeves is talking about about £4 billion worth of fraud, they're specifically talking about money that was paid out for equipment that was not usable. And that includes one of the contracts that they had. And that it's not just the cost. It's not just the fact that we shelled over that money without checking first. It's the fact that we then had to spend more money on storing the useless PPE because we still owned it. The government owned it. We couldn't do anything with it. So we had to pay for storage. And then we had to pay for disposal.
Yeah. Yeah. And people died. We've got a message from Colin saying, I'm happy to see Moan back in the news. Too many voters have already forgotten the corruption that went on during COVID, which I can't disagree with.
Well, there's not enough new about it in the first place. They need to know about it.
Yeah. Jeff says, Mrs. Moan may have a point that they are being scapegoated. I am worried that this worthless pair will be the only ones to face trial and a lot of other Tory mates will get off. I want to see others.
Yeah, there should be loads of others. There may be, because at the end of the day, if the government are going to claw back any of this fraud, they first of all have to prove fraud, don't they? So I think there will be.
Yeah.
But who knows what the consequences will be other than actually, I mean, is it just going to be forcing them to give the money back, or are we going to see people in prison? I mean,
I hope they go to jail for what they've done.
So do I.
And also, to show other people that you can't get away with this kind of American-style corruption in our politics.
Yeah,
we're not going to stand for it.
Well, that's what you have to do. You have to make sure there are consequences. Otherwise, if you want to stop corruption, you have to make sure corruption is punished, and all too often it's not. Yeah. And I have no confidence it will be in this case.
Talking of corruption, Refuck are refucked apparently. Haven't they?
They're having a bit of a meltdown.
So Musk isn't going to back them anymore. He's going to find a new political party, probably
he might do, yeah,
EDL or something to back. But they're fighting amongst themselves. You've got Rupert Lowe, who has been kicked out of the party, and they sat on this information about how much of a dick he was for how long? 3 months.
Yeah,
they said they had it, and then they waited until he publicly said something bad about their leader, the Führer. Nigel Farage, and suddenly there's a police investigation.
Yes, I mean there is an extent to which you could sort of go along with the idea of, okay, allegations are made, so they hired a senior barrister, which is fair enough. They do an investigation, then there comes a point where they go, yeah, we think actually you should probably report this to the police. You report it to the police, and then that's fair enough. But the timing is highly suspicious.
Yes.
Highly suspicious.
Yes.
But at the same time, if the allegations are valid, and even if he doesn't get convicted, if the police seem to think it's serious enough, Farage will be vindicated because his supporters will go, well, what did you want them to do? He hired a lawyer, the lawyer investigated, then they referred it to the police. And it's like, well, yeah, you can be suspicious of the timing, but if he ends up being vindicated over this, he could gain. But the fact that the far right are splitting is no help to him. I suppose his best chance is this new party that may or may not form, that Ben Habib seems keen on, and Rupert Lowe apparently, although he hasn't said publicly, he might be keen on, and that Elon Musk might fund, but he might not. Remember, he's a crackhead. But it's they haven't got anyone. Really, have they? So are they going to be that much of a challenge?
The least charismatic people from the Brexit party,
exactly,
and then saying we're going to make a new party with the uncharismatic people. Now we all saw how much Refuck jumped in the polls in the run-up to the last general election when they brought Nigel Farage back on board. If that
was worth a good 3 percentage points.
Yeah, if that had been Richard Tice on his own, he's unlikable. I mean, no, he's got no charisma. He's just a horrible little Rupert. Funnily, because his name isn't Rupert, whereas Rupert Lowe's name is Rupert, and he's even worse Rupert. But he's just a posh boy. He's just a boring posh boy. Whereas Farage, unfortunately, has the gift of the gab, and he's got what they'll call the common touch, the same thing that Donald Trump has, where people think that he's a blue collar billionaire.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not. He's just pretending. He's just playing a character to make people think that he's okay. He's one of them.
Yeah.
What other examples include Jeremy Clarkson or the axe in that old fable about the axe convincing the
Yeah,
trees
the
that he was
Turkish
one of
one.
them because his handle was made of wood. So the trees all voted for the axe. So yeah, I reform infighting, fantastic. Bring it on. Bring on all the popcorn. But the Tories aren't doing much better either. Did you see Prime Minister's questions this week?
Yeah,
It says
it
every
was-
week, aren't we? Oh my God, she's so bad at it.
She was asking questions that might have come from like a Labour backbencher who was throwing a soft one for the Prime Minister to say, "Oh, we've boosted people's pay," because that was pretty much his answer to every question.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you inviting the Prime Minister to say that he's increasing people's standard of living?
To brag about stuff.
Because he's not bragging about it very well. So she basically gave him the opportunity. It's like, why would you do that? Do you know what being leader of the opposition means?
Yeah. We've got another super chat come in from John C. Thank you very much. Moan and hubby accusing COVID inquiry of establishment cover-up after their second request to become core participants were rejected. Why should they be core participants?
Well, exactly. Especially as they admitted lying.
We're the victims in all this, Phil. Phil, we're the victims. The victims. My God. Stuart says Nigel Farage hardly none of the people with his background in private school banking and stockbroking. We've got Martin saying, my background is a producer in software development, so long-term planning was my day-to-day. Don't get me started on the Dido Harding fiasco. Remember that? Old school chum of...
I mean, that was tens of billions of pounds just pissed away on nothing.
Yeah, on an app that didn't work. 37 billion was allocated, and not all that was spent, but...
No, I think it was a good 32 billion ended up getting spent now.
Jesus, on an app. And it was because we didn't want to use the European one. Yeah. Which worked. So we had one that cost billions more and didn't work.
Yeah.
Which was fucking painful.
I think the German one cost 50 million euros.
My God. Oh, talking of private schools, so the figures are out, and VAT on private schools has not increased the number of kids going to state schools one iota. Not one little snot-nosed brat is now going to state school instead of private school.
Well, the odd, apparently, in a couple of counties that have absolutely loads of private schools, there's been like a slight increase, but it's still the same figure as it was a few years ago, so it might be just a random blip. But either way, it's not causing this melting down of state schools because they haven't got room for them all.
Yes.
So it was all complete
But when you
nonsense.
put together all the subsidies and the tax write-offs and all the honeymoon, honey cliff, honey handshake, whatever they call it, golden handshake, golden goodbye, all of that, put it all together, the cost to the state of having a British kid go through a private school actually costs 3 times more than sending them to state school. And I
get how people can't understand that. I get how the argument that, but we're saving the taxpayer money by sending them to private school. I get how that works on people.
We subsidise
They're not
them.
at all.
No.
But it is counterintuitive. I get that.
The education costs 10 times the amount, and we subsidise a hell of a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we let them do tax write-offs on things like shooting ranges and toboggan runs and fucking
all sorts
golf
of things.
Golf courses. You know,
because they take in one poor kid and pretend to be a charity.
Yeah, one in 100 will be a full bursary on average, which means they came from a background where the parents couldn't afford any fees. 1 in 100 on average. That is just mind blowing. But yeah, goes to show we were right, and the Tories and all the newspapers were wrong. Funny that, Phil.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I noticed on the day as well when I was reading this report in The Guardian. So I went straight to the Telegraph, right? Actually, a few hours later, I gave them
That's
time.
never a good idea, Phil. You got to look after your mental health, man.
The Telegraph's a very well organised website, but so it has an education section. It's all really well organised. You can find what you want there. Not a dicky bird. There was an article on VAT on private schools. It was about how a Labour MP, I don't know which one it was, had suggested, well, maybe when the economy gets a bit better, we could take VAT off again. I was thinking, no, we won't. But either way, that's all they had. They didn't have any reporting on the fact that all of their, can we call it Project Fear, was bollocks.
Yes, we can call it Project Fear. But yes, it was. Ernie Ben says all those golden subsidies are an absolute shower. Well, they are. I mean, people could write off their kids' education as a business expense somehow. You know, it was like, really? And they weren't paying it VAT, which pissed me off. You can't write off, paying for food at the supermarket to keep your family alive. You can't write that off as a business expense. You know, not paying.
There's also some weird things that tax is really stacked toward, against people. But like I've said before, so because this is my business, I'm allowed to put a reasonable adjustment for like electricity that I use. That I put that as an expense, that's fine. But my wife, who is also working from home, but as an employee, she can't do that. I think she can, but it's very limited. Like, it's not worth it in her case, because you're only allowed to put so much down, which is still way less than she's actually using on electricity for work. But because she's an employee, she can't. I actually have, a thingy that I actually did work it out properly, so I'm not just making it up, and how much electricity I use on an average day.
Yeah.
So I worked it out quite accurately, and but she can't do that.
No. And this is the way that the tax system is set up. It protects the rich all the time. Like they get all this free stuff. It's something I complain about all the time on this channel. It's like, rich people get given freebies all the fucking time. They don't pay for gigs. They don't pay to go to the footy. They don't pay to go to Cheltenham. They don't pay the hat that they wear to Cheltenham. Someone fucking gives it to them, Phil. Meanwhile, the rest of us are struggling, keeping our heads above water. And they're just given stuff by, millionaires give other stuff to millionaires. Yeah. And then when it comes down to this thing of like, oh, it's the politics of envy, expression I absolutely hate. And it's like, no, I'm not envious of rich people, right? I'm pissed off that they get stuff.
Just that they don't pay their own share. That's all I ask.
Yeah,
pay their own
it's
share.
Not envy. Do you know who's envious of rich people? Other rich people. They're the ones with the green eye looking at it. Oh my God, their yacht is a bit bigger than my yacht. I'm going to have to exploit some African orphans in order to have an even bigger yacht than them.
I mean, the problem really is the middle class, because, it's like that sketch, isn't it, in the Frost Report? Those of you outside Britain won't know it. But, you do have this situation, like, because the aspirational middle class, as they describe themselves, and they look up to rich people. So it's almost like they feel kinship with very rich people. So they're sort of, oh yeah, we understand the reasons for this. And some tax breaks, yeah, you do understand the reason for it. But they don't realise they've got way more in common with the poor bastard on benefits than they do the rich bastards. But it's because they want to be the rich bastards.
Yeah, it's not aspirational to be on benefits.
They support the idea of tax breaks for rich people because they hope one day to be rich, even though they've got no bloody plan for it.
Yeah.
I'll work hard. That works. Yeah. How's that working out for you?
Jack TNO, I never see the point of private schools. It feels like an egocentric way of raising your child. It absolutely is. Well, if your child's annoying, send them off to boarding school and you have to deal with them. Richard Grumpy Git, Charterhouse, where Hunt used to go, has a golf course, a very shiny running track, 20 tennis courts, 2 hockey courts, and about 10 football pitches. Meanwhile, schools in Liverpool are having to share facilities because they've only got like one field between 2 or 3 schools. But yeah, going back onto, I want to talk about benefits because obviously there's some more stuff about that's been revealed this week. But yeah, the right would have you believe that for people like you and I, being on benefits is an aspiration. We just want to sit on our arse all day playing PlayStation and just get free money from the government. That's all we want to do with our lives, because that's how I guess that's how a lot of people feel. I don't think it is. I think that most people would think that having lots of money and being able to do whatever you want to do in life is aspirational.
I mean, I have had to rely on benefits. It is a shit life, and I couldn't afford everything. It is not something anyone wants. Now, yes, there are some people who might have a very low expectation of their standard of living, and there might be a few people who are quite happy to live a miserable existence like a mushroom, and they can't be asked. Okay, there's hardly anyone like that, though. It's a horrible existence.
Yeah. Well, it's like saying let's burn down the NHS because hypochondriacs exist. The people who are claiming benefits, there's more people getting money from tax avoidance.
Yes, there are way more rich scroungers than poor ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Not paying their fair share, getting free subsidies, PPE contracts, whatever from the government.
Yeah.
And it costs the taxpayer so much more. Fraud costs the taxpayer so much more. We're talking like you know, it's
Yeah,
like
I
100
will.
times more. It's a ridiculous
I will actually
amount.
just point out there, because I know a lot of people are saying, because again, it's the emphasis on the news. So there's a lot of people going, you know, oh, why they put all this focus on benefit fraud? Why don't they go after the rich ones? It's like, well, they are doing that as well. Like Rachel Reeves has boosted the number of tax inspectors. Tax inspectors aren't there for poor people. Like, the reason tax inspectors exist is to go after people who might be lying about their tax returns. So straight away, they're not needed if you don't have a tax return because you're an employee. They're not even needed for people like me, unless they decided that I was fiddling my tax expense.
Definitely not needed for me. I don't, don't have anything. It wouldn't be worth their while.
But yeah, so tax inspectors do exist to go after rich people, and the government have boosted the number of tax inspectors. So they are also going after rich people who are skiving out of it.
Yeah.
There's just not as much emphasis in the news. I will just point out one other thing as well, because I mean, I have said, if I were a Labour MP, I would 100% oppose this move to even freeze PPE, PIP, sorry, PP, behave yourself, freeze PIP. But there's a lot of people go, oh, they're just like the Tories. And I will say this, not just that it's not to the same extent that the Tories want to do anyway. I'm still going to emphasise the fact about this, oh, they're all right wing. The largest nationalisation programme in my life, the largest boost to affordable and social housing in my life. You've got, they have boosted the pay of the poorest workers. And, you know, all of these things, and it's like they're getting one or two things wrong. They are getting one or two things wrong, badly wrong, I think. But they're still getting like a dozen things right. So I do have to like just kick back there a little bit as well for people who are going, they fixate on one thing that's very newsworthy and go, oh, this is just like the Tories. It's like, what about all the other things that aren't in the news?
Well, the Jobs Act, you know, giving people more rights at work.
The Employment Rights Bill, which, despite a load of people going, oh, they're watering it down. They spent the last 3 months, you know, headlines, oh, they're watering it down. They're going back on their promises, going back on the promises. So it goes through the House of Commons. And what's happened to it? Has it been watered down? No, it's actually been boosted. So you've actually had, you know, business groups, some business groups, not all, whining a little bit because they actually boosted it to try and close some loopholes. So again, you know, no one's going on about that because it's like, that's not newsworthy because it's something they're doing right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time, though, I mean, I think the criticism, and you know, we've talked ad nauseum on this channel about Labour comms, but the way that they're allowing news to trickle out about what they're planning to do with benefits, with PIP, it's disgraceful. I think it's an absolute disgrace because to me, it feels like they're playing this game that Labour have got, this wicked wheeze that they've come up with, where they've gone, we'll make people think that it's going to be worse than it actually is. And then when we make the autumn statement, spring statement, whatever, the budget, it won't be as bad. And people go, oh, phew, I'm relieved it wasn't as bad.
Yeah,
but when you're dealing with people who are suffering at the moment, who've got mental health problems anyway, and you're making them more stressed, I mean...
But also, I mean, I hope Labour MPs stand up to this because it's what we've heard that they want to do. It is actually a breach of the... As far as I'm concerned, it is a manifesto break, because in the manifesto multiple times it talks about support for disabled people. There is not a hint of their living standards falling for any reason, and that's what this would represent if they did it.
Absolutely.
And you can I mean, the neat stuff you can justify, because if you're someone in your early 20s, you actually should either be in employment, education or training. You should. There is, it's all paid for, you know, so if you can't get a job, you actually should be in education. So that's reasonable. It's reasonable that you do not have very young people on job seekers because they should be in training. But, you know, freezing, which if you freeze something, a payment, that is a real terms pay cut, particularly when, if you think about what a lot of people use PIP for, it's for they may have, because of their disability, they may have extra energy costs. Well, the cost of energy is going up again. They may have transport. I mean, they may be working.
A lot of people on PIP are working. Yeah, they're working.
they need special. They cannot just get the bus, and if they can't drive themselves, they may need a taxi to get to work. It helps pay for that, and those costs are going up.
Yeah.
I
Purity
mean,
vendetta.
even if they can get on the bus, their costs definitely going up.
Purity vendetta, I think, makes a very good point, though. That's irrelevant when you live in fear of the brown envelope or the crooked work assessments. It's all well and good for you to blithely say, look at all the good things. And I think a good point that Purity's making there is like, yeah, you're right, Phil. They probably have done a dozen great things, and this is the one bad thing. But this is the thing people will remember. This is the
it's the thing that affects
absolutely cling on to because it's negative. And in the same way that, you know, if someone leaves a negative comment, I'm likely to remember it more than if someone just says, oh, you're doing a great job. Even if like 100 people say you've done a great job and then one person says you're a ginger twat, the ginger twat comment will, you know, it will irk me more. And that's just human psychology, isn't it?
I'm not saying we should like go, oh, it's just one mistake, leave it. It should be stopped, and Labour MPs have the power to stop it. What I'm saying is it doesn't help to just fixate on that, because the consequence of that is at the next election, you end up focusing on the fact that they're not doing anything. You forget about all the good stuff, and then you let the Tories back in, who then do all of the bad things. No, we're not.
And I think that pushing Labour MPs to stand up against this, as we're saying on this channel,
we should be saying,
write to your MP and say, I am on PIP, or I've got friends on benefits, and we need to friends with benefits. I've got friends with benefits. Help us out. To rebel against this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I said myself, if I were a Labour MP, a lot of people who know me will know, I rage at backbench MPs all the time for deciding their own policies. You don't get to decide your own policies. If you want to stand as a Labour MP or any parties, under any party's banner, but Labour banner in this case, if you stand under that banner, you stand by that manifesto. You don't get to say, oh, I don't like that bit, I'm going to vote against it. No, you vote with the government. Because
if it's in the manifesto.
You stood on that manifesto.
And this is in the manifesto.
It's not just that it's not in the manifesto, it's actually a breach of the manifesto. So I would actually say to the party whips, I'm going to vote, if you give me a vote on this, I'm going to vote against it because I'm voting in favour of the manifesto. You cannot tell me to vote against the manifesto. They say, oh, but we also promised to balance the books. Yeah, but you've got other choices for that, whereas you also said you'd support disabled people, and this does the opposite.
So where's this information coming from? Is this from interviews with politicians?
So we didn't know anything for ages. The only reason we know anything now, apart from people making stuff up, is because Labour ministers have been sounding the ideas out with Labour backbench MPs. So inevitably then people have then told the press, as I would. So that's how we know now what they're planning. But we also know that if Labour MPs say, no, we're not supporting this, then they will go back to the drawing board. They're seeing this as the path of least resistance because in their minds, it might just be for a year. The only reason, remember, it wasn't in the budget in October. They weren't planning on doing this.
No.
There were
no
in
the manifesto, at all. Not in the budget.
It was not in the budget. There were no plans to cuts for any benefits at all in the budget. Yes. I know there was cuts to the welfare bill that was supposed to be entirely through fraud. This has come about because of the fiscal headroom being blown away. So Labour have decided that this is the path of least resistance because key voters tend to resent benefits anyway because they don't get them. Labour MPs need to make it not the path of least resistance.
Yeah. Janeway's asking, where is press reform, proportional representation, protection for trans people? So press reform, was that in the... I know proportional representation wasn't in the manifesto. Was press reform in the manifesto?
No, not at all.
What about the fact that they said that they were going to strengthen the Gender Recognition Act of 20?
They haven't said they're not. I know there's been some stories recently going, oh, they seem to have dropped it. They haven't. It wasn't in the King's speech. They weren't planning on doing it now anyway. It is quick and easy. It's easily the sort of thing they could do, say, next year. As long as they do it before the next election, they will have kept the promise. Yeah. My worry is if they break one manifesto promise, it's like, well, they might as well break a few more, which is, again, why I would also urge Labour MPs to not let them break this manifesto promise on support for disabled people. They didn't mention welfare really in the manifesto. They didn't really mention benefits as such, but they did specifically mention support for disabled people in a whole range of areas, including helping them get into work, whereas reducing the money that they use to provide for the extra expenses that disabled people have, and including being able to get to work. I mean, it's so stupid as well. Like, they're trying to say, oh, there's this moral imperative to focus on work. It's like, but this is putting up barriers to people getting into work.
Yeah.
It's a barrier. Yeah. Like, for example, when I was unemployed, I had to do without gas. I couldn't have hot water or anything like that. Couldn't afford it because I had to pay for car insurance, so that if I needed to go for a job interview or for a job that would need me to drive, because the public transport wasn't viable, I'd need to make sure I had a car.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't using the car when I was unemployed, couldn't afford to run it. But if I got a job, then I'd need that. Yeah. So, you know, so if I couldn't have afforded the car insurance either, then that's a load of jobs I'd have had to turn down. In fact, the next job I got did require me to drive. Yeah. And I couldn't have done that if I couldn't have afforded the car insurance.
Darren Christian has just dropped a super chat in, £10. Thank you very much, sir. You're doing a great job, Graham and Phil. Yeah, thank you. You're doing a great job as well. Thank you, Darren. On the car insurance thing, do you know why car insurance is so expensive? Because of rich people. Rich people buying their snot-nosed womb goblins, crotch nuggets, whatever they call them, those little things, children. Really, really fucking expensive cars. And they go out, and if you crash into them, your insurance company has got to pay, instead of just, I don't know, £1,000 to fix the freaking car, it's £100,000 because they bought a kid a stupid fucking, supercar. And that's the problem. That's the problem. So I think the car should have a cap. And above that, it has a, if it costs anything more than, let's say, 10 grand to fix this car, you have to foot that yourself. Don't have such an expensive car. You laugh, but it will bring down everyone's premiums.
Well, I'm sure it would. I bet it would.
I remember the last car I had was a Micra. This is 15 years ago, and the Micra cost me less to buy than it cost to insure. That is just what?
Often the way, yeah.
Yeah, in case I accidentally drive into
hit someone else, into a car that still works,
Changeling Kid is saying many of us on PIP do volunteer work as it's not nearly as gate kept and more flexible to our needs, but we're not on the payroll because we're considered unemployed. Again, grey issues there. But Chris C, I think, makes a really good point. Labour's comms need to get a grip on this issue. I know of at least 2 people on Universal Credit and PIP who have had a mental health crisis because of this rhetoric. I know the newspapers aren't helping, but Labour could, using its own channels, make it clear that no, you're on PIP. That's fine. We're not going to touch that. We're not going to touch that. But
unfortunately, they're planning on touching it. That's the problem I have now, and I just really hope that Labour MPs don't get. I hope they don't fall for the arguments about, but it's not going to be an election issue. Well, if it's not going to be an election issue, why are you making people suffer then?
Yeah.
Because it's not. I mean, the thing is, and I said this before, yes, key voters do resent benefits payments, absolutely true. But they're not going to change their vote based on it. They're going to change their vote based on how their lives got better, not how you're going to promise to make other people's lives worse. Yeah. But it is a voting issue for the people affected, or for people who know them or have empathy with them.
Yeah.
And that's your danger, that you get people to vote for effectively, either directly or indirectly, for the worst option because you're not being a good enough option.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. MZ is saying, still can't afford to run a car. Bus and train fare costs bother me. I'm in your boat, MZ. I mean, I can use my partner's car, but I don't have one of my own. And one of the reasons is just the absolute mad costs of running a car these days. But also the amount that I end up paying to get to town on the bus costs me more than if I had a car to drive into town, the cost of the fuel, and also to park it for an hour or two. It costs more to get the bus. And if there's 4 of us in the family all getting the bus, it costs more than 4 times it would than to drive in. And this is Vimes Boots Index again, where the poorest people in society end up shouldering a much bigger burden of the costs of just living.
You get it everywhere. Like, if you're, let's say, if you're not very mobile, I mean, where I live, for example, it's the same in a lot of places in like the suburbs. Where I live, I mean, I mean, you can get online shopping, but I mean that, there's a cost to that as well. But if you can only afford to like get stuff on a weekly basis or something, and you can't afford that much, you might not be able to spend enough for the online shop. In which case, you've got a choice. You either have to travel to the nearest town. There's two, but they're both some miles away, or you use the local shop round the corner, which is therefore more expensive.
Yeah.
And has less range.
So on a Sunday, there's no bus services to our village. I have to walk to the next village, which takes 15 minutes. It's no problem for me. I'm able-bodied. But if you have difficulty with your mobility, what are you supposed to do? Get a taxi on a Sunday? And it's I see it as house arrest. I mean, I see Brexit as, bring everything back to Brexit. I see that as a mass house arrest for the country, for the young people in this country to not be able to go and travel around their continent unless daddy's very rich. And I see the way that the facilities for getting around, except in London, it's great. London's perfect. Well, not perfect, but
their city centres are good.
Transport system in London is remarkable, probably the best in the world. And I've travelled on a lot of public transport systems around the world. It's a light years ahead of New York. I think it's better than the metro in Paris. It's really, really good. And I love the fact that it's got an integrated system. You can get on a bus, you can get on a train, get on the underground, get on the ferry, whatever, it doesn't matter. Get on the big Ferris wheel if you want to travel around on that. And you're paying the same people. You're paying the same lot. Whereas here in Durham and in Liverpool, you're paying Aviva or you're paying Stagecoach. Oh, you've got a bus pass for Stagecoach. Well, even though the bus that's just turned up is going your way and goes exactly where you need it to go, you've got to stand there in the rain for another 25 minutes for the next bus, which is the same number, goes the same route, with the company that you have the pass for.
So it's just a technical question there, Leipzig. Just ask Phil what a 3-line whip is, please. So a 3-line whip. So basically, in terms of whipping, like sometimes there are free votes. And then sometimes there's whipping, which is basically say you must vote this way. So a 1-line whip is like, look, if you're in the neighbourhood, can you pop in and vote for us, please?
Yeah.
A 2-line whip is unless you've got a pretty good reason, not if you're based in your constituency, that's fine, we can't help it. But if you are in London, you need to come in and you need to vote for this. It's quite important.
Yeah.
A 3-line whip is unless you've got a stupendously good reason to not be in Westminster, you are going to come in. And you are going to travel from your constituency, you're going to come in and you're going to vote this way. Otherwise, the chief whip is going to bugger you with a massive radish.
Well, you'll be suspended from the party. You'll lose a lot of the perks that you have.
You may do.
Being part
but
of
again,
the party.
Yeah, you can do.
There are a range of
they don't
sanctions that
you
the whips
don't
can
always.
use.
Yeah. So it's basically that you will vote this way. Yeah. You will go out of your way to come in and vote this way. Otherwise, yes, consequences. But of course, I mean, if 100 Labour MPs said they were going to vote, I mean, that would still not be enough to sink it. But they wouldn't suspend 100 MPs. That'd be mental.
Well,
the thing is, like, they wouldn't do it anyway because they've already sort of hinted. That's why they had these briefings with MPs. Yeah. It was specifically to not only win them over, but also to gauge reaction. If backbench MPs had basically said as one, no, this is not happening. Manifesto, see? Then they would have to go back to the drawing board. They'd have to go back to Rachel Reeves and says, this ain't going to fly. We need something else.
Yeah.
I would accept, if I were a Labour MP, a cut to some sort of public spending in the 4th or 5th year of the budget plan on the basis that it shouldn't be needed. We're only doing it now because the budget forecasts are not taking into account various things that we think are going to help, such as they're not taking into account the support for work programs. They're not taking into account the closer trade relationships we're going to negotiate with the EU. They're not taking into account even some of the infrastructure they're building up, like housing and GB energy stuff. So there's various things that the OBR are not able to take into account that they think are going to bring dividends. So they could, I would accept them just saying, look, okay, we're going to cut that. It's technically a cut. If you're going to whine about it, it's a cut. Okay. But because it's in 4 years' time, we don't think we're going to need to do it.
Yeah.
It's just to make the figures add up. That's what I would do.
Early Burns in the chat saying also the definition of work is very limited. Care, social projects are not regarded as real work, but they benefit society. And someone earlier was saying about you only get like £59 a week for looking after a sick relative. I didn't even get that. I applied for carers allowance to look after my dad, and I was they kept me waiting for 8 months for a decision, and then the computer said no because I had spent 1 month longer than it was like a couple of weeks longer than I was allowed to out of the country in the previous 5 years.
There's a comment there saying there's 36 Labour MPs are backing benefits cuts though, Phil. So it's the second time I've seen that comment. First of all, what I would say is I haven't actually seen any. I've seen claims, but I've not actually seen any proof of it. But second, I'm not saying it's definitely not true. If it is true, 36, that's not even a tenth of Labour MPs. That's doesn't matter. My problem is there don't seem to be many more than 36 Labour MPs opposing it. That's my problem. Yeah, I don't care about 36 Labour MPs backing it. I care about only about the same number opposing it.
Stuart says, I thought a free line whip was what Max Mosley was into.
Yeah, that's it.
So yeah,
the upper class has been to a bit of flagellation.
And I spat out my false teeth with the last leader of the Labour Party was when he had a 3-line whip to vote with the Conservatives. So the most damaging policy of my entire lifetime, a policy that would lead to the poorest people in society getting even poorer and the costs of absolutely everything doubling.
I'll tell you another thing I will say. So we know if we were still in the EU, Rachel Reeves would have at least an extra £40 billion a year to spend. Wow. So the winter fuel allowance thing, that wouldn't be a thing. There would be no suggestion of cuts to benefits at all. Because remember, they didn't want to cut benefits because I know they're prioritising it above other things. But in the October budget, no cuts at all. So for extra £40 billion, there would be 0 cuts for benefits. There would be the winter fuel allowance would still be universal if people have got a problem with that. They might not have even had to do that thing with the inheritance tax thing. £40 billion is a lot of moolah, right? And absolutely anyone, left wing or right wing, that thought that Brexit, even if they were neutral on it, if they thought, okay, then let's do it, you do not get to complain about difficult spending choices now because it's your fault. That's all I'm going to say. It's really that simple. If you thought people were told how much it would cost, it's not like it's something we worked out afterwards. People were told by economics groups, various, including the OBR, were told exactly what it would do to tax revenues. Yeah. And they were comfortable with that. So you do not get to complain.
Stick that in your Lexit hole. Okay, right, we're going to have to leave it at that, Phil. Hopefully, I'll be back at 9:30 tonight. I can't guarantee it because I don't know what my internet situation will be. But all being well, please join us for the Friday night social with me and special guests. Phil, will you be able to make it along this evening, or you got better things to do?
I have got better things to do.
Of course he has.
Age of Conan at the moment.
Anyway, well, listen, thanks so much for doing this, Phil. Always good to see you and have a discussion. Everyone in the chat, thank you. Thank you for watching. Everyone in the chat, thank you for leaving a comment.
I'll also be off my tits. So I don't
brilliant.
Think you want me
come on the show. Come on your show. Off your head on morphine.
I've never taken... I might actually just fall asleep. I've never taken codeine before. I don't know what it's going to do to me.
Oh, come on, go on the show. Be brilliant. We'll get you to do things.
I might just fall asleep.
I hope it works because sciatica's horrible. My brother had sciatica. It's not fun.
Well, it might. I mean, it may just be that I've done something and it's just pressing on a nerve. I mean, we don't. All I know is something is pressing on my sciatic nerve.
Yeah, that's not fun. Anyway, well, enjoy your codeine. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for the super chats. Really appreciate that. If you would like to give us a like on the way out, that would be hugely appreciated by Mr. Moorhouse and myself. And until next time, I'll say thanks for watching. Hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.